And we are live with another edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. I am one of your co-hosts, Nicholas Pavona, joined alongside once again by my co-host Andrew Johnson, as we now have reached Week 7 in the almost the National Football League, Johnson, college football season, as we now move into Week number 8 coming up this upcoming weekend. And Week 7, Johnson, as we know, was the penultimate big week in college football. We did have two great finishes between some highly ranked teams, the game in Eugene as well as the game in Baton Rouge. But for the most part, around the rest of the college football world, we saw a couple of near upsets. The top ranked teams were able to get their job done and barely survive in those games. We saw the number one team in the country as well do their job in the Red River rivalry. A little bit of a shakeup in the top 25 polls as well. Not too much movement whatsoever. We do have some new ranked teams as well. But some stuff to dive into here in week number 7 and then going into week number 8. And there's a pretty good slate for week number 8 as well, so it should be a very interesting mushing hour that we have later on.
Yeah, we had a great week in week number 7. These games, Oregon, Ohio State, LSU, Ole Miss, they really held up to the those high standards we were having from the beginning of the season. These teams were highly ranked going into these games, and they were complete barn burners from start to finish.
Yeah, and we knew going into this week that the two big games, obviously, it was Oregon, Ohio State, you had Ole Miss and LSU, but there are other games as well that we'll have a segment in the show that we think like out of those three teams, maybe who is the most concerning out of the teams that almost lost this past weekend, because they all did have a really good chance of losing this week that maybe could have put a wrench into any potential college football playoff hopes at the end of the season. But I think there's no better way to start the show, Johnson, than recapping that wild finish that we had in Eugene this past weekend between number 2 Ohio State and number 3 Oregon. A big matchup for the Ducks, obviously their first big test in the Big Ten this season, and a very nice back and forth game between these two teams. Ohio State jumped out early. Oregon would answer, even though they missed their extra point. They would make it a 1-point game. It was back and forth in the second quarter. Oregon would go into the halftime with a 1-point lead. Ohio State would get a third quarter touchdown for Jeremiah Smith to give them the lead going into the fourth. And then we saw Oregon's offense get a nice, big rushing touchdown from Dylan Gabriel. That gave them the lead. And then both teams would trade field goals to end this one. Oregon gets the field goal with 1:47 left. They take the lead. Ohio State had a chance towards the end of the game to go down the field and get the game-winning field goal. A big penalty prolonged their drive, which put them in a very long third and I think it was 22, if I'm not mistaken, on that play, but with 6 seconds left. And unfortunately for Ohio State, time really much ran out on them. Will Howard scrambles to try to get extra yards to set them up for a field goal. They just had no time whatsoever to do anything, and time ran out on the Buckeyes, and time runs out on their undefeated season as well, as Oregon holds on for a 32-31 win, their first big win in the Big Ten. They now go to 6-0 on the season, and they drop the Buckeyes to 5-1.
Yeah, and I know one of the main concerns we talked about last year was Oregon competing in the Big Ten, because we said they left their nice cushy home in the Pac-12 where they had a guaranteed auto bid every single year if they stayed there. They had outside competition every now and then. They had Washingtons. They had the U.S. Yeah, they had USC's. They had Oregon State for 15 minutes.
Utah.
Yeah, they had Utah for 15 minutes as well. But Oregon made the decision to go into a big boy football conference. And not only did they go in this conference, they have set the top dog now. So there's a new pecking order in the Big Ten currently, and Oregon's sitting on top, which is a wild statement considering 12 months ago that Ohio State-Michigan rivalry was red hot. What I mean by red hot was it was probably reaching the pinnacle of the last 10 years or so, because you had really 7 years where Michigan was just not competitive. And then the last 4 is like, all right, this is like a blood feud again.
Yeah.
And now Oregon's here. It's like, all right, they have a top dog now. So these two teams have been fighting for supremacy inside this conference for the last decade. They would just push them aside on this past Saturday, and this new top dog in the conference.
And this is a great showing from these two teams. A lot of great playmakers in this game. Will Howard, despite that play at the end of the game, he played phenomenal. Trevion Henderson had another solid game, 87 yards rushing. We saw Jeremiah Smith, I mentioned, had a touchdown as well. And Mecca Buga, I think that's how you pronounce the last name. He had a touchdown as well with 93 yards receiving. Smith had 100. And then on the Oregon side, you get Gabriel playing his best game by far as a Duck, and especially at the biggest time of the season. 341-yard performance, two passing touchdowns. I mentioned the rushing touchdown. Jordan James, not is familiar with this Ohio State team. Remember back a couple of years ago, he faced Ohio State when Oregon visited Columbus, and he had a big game in that one as well. He ran for 115 yards and a touchdown. And Evan Stewart, the receiver, with 149 yards receiving and a touchdown as well. So, kind of what we expected from these two teams. A very high scoring matchup. These are the top two teams, in a lot of people's opinion, in the Big Ten. We kind of expected this going into the season, that these would probably be the two likely teams at the end of the season to play for the Big Ten championship. And most likely, this is going to be the same case. Unless one of these two teams loses another game, if Ohio State was to lose the second game on the season, which I don't think is really necessarily going to happen. And for Oregon, if you look at the rest of their schedule, it looks pretty winnable. Maybe the toughest game is at Michigan, but I think with the way Michigan's been this season, they probably get the win in that game. So they have looked a little bit scary the first couple of weeks of the season. A lot of close encounters that they had earlier on. But Oregon's got a clear path, in my opinion, to make it to the Big Ten championship for the first time in their first year. And they probably will be facing this same exact Ohio State team at the end of the year.
Yeah, it's going to be kind of crazy that we're going to get a rematch of this game, and it's going to be on a neutral site. So, if you're a college football fan, this is a great time to start putting those futures bets in, because I have a feeling that Ohio State will win that rematch should they get there.
Yeah, it's very tough to beat a team twice in one season, as a lot of people can attest. But who knows? This might not be the Big Ten championship. There's another team in the Big Ten that could potentially put a wrench into those plans, and we'll talk
Oh,
about
I doubt it.
what happened to them. And you never know. You never know. It's still stranger things have happened. We know that each and every year with college football, and we'll have to see. It's very very possible that that team could be in there. Let's talk about the next game, Johnson. That game in Baton Rouge, a huge matchup. Kind of, in my opinion, a matchup where if you lose this game, you're probably out of the SEC title race, and if you
Yep.
lose the game, your college football playoff hopes are also starting to dwindle as well. Matchup between number 9 Ole Miss and number 13 LSU. Early on, scoreless game. Scoreless game going into the second quarter. Very surprised by that. A lot of missed field goals earlier on as well, which was kind of a reason for that. But then the second quarter is where the offense started to pick up. Ole Miss went into the halftime with a 17-13 lead. The teams would then finally be able to trade field goals going into the fourth quarter. LSU was trailing by a touchdown with under 3 minutes left. They get a touchdown pass from Garrett Nussmeier to Aaron Anderson with 27 seconds left. They send the game to overtime. Credit to Caden Davis from Ole Miss. He had missed a couple field goals earlier in the game. Drills a 57-yarder to give Ole Miss a 3-point lead. But LSU had a chance to walk it off, and that's exactly what they did, Johnson. One play touchdown from Nussmeier to Kyron Lacey, and LSU gets a big-time win this season. They now go to 2-0 in the SEC play, now 5-1 on the regular season as they beat Ole Miss by a final of 29-26.
Now, when I say Jackson, you say Dart. Jackson.
Nope.
Ah, come on. Well, I want to talk about Jackson Dart here
He
for a
had, a,
second,
he
because
had a fun game.
he had a fine game, right? But
Yeah.
the first 4 games of the season, he looked otherworldly. Where he's kind of come back down to you've been tempering expectations now, right? Like the first 4 games, he looked like this world-eating quarterback that's probably going in the top in the maybe the second round, right? Because he's not a first round
Yeah.
QB, but
No, he's
he
not a
looks like
first
he
round
was
guy.
playing himself into the second round. But the last couple games, he's seen kind of mortal, and this was one of them. Fine game, but not really.
This
As
was a
Bill
game.
Belichick once said, I want to see the guys who play well in the big game, and this was his opportunity to show that, and he didn't step up to the plate.
This was a game that, LSU has been known for this season to have a really rough defense. The defense has not been playing great this season. And for the most part, Ole Miss was getting touchdowns, but it didn't seem as consistent enough to get them to win. Starting that overtime period is where they really needed a touchdown, and they pretty much went 3-and-out on that first drive, leading them to that very long field goal. Thankfully, they were able to make the field goal, but it didn't matter because they gave up the one play touchdown right after they got that field goal. And you got to give your credit to LSU because obviously the season didn't start the way they had wanted to. That loss to USC. They've rallied off now 5 straight wins. That's including a close win to South Carolina. Now this close win to Ole Miss. And now if you look at the rest of the season, they have a good chance. Not easy games for the rest of the season. You're going to A&M. You still have to play Alabama at home, but you could potentially get past those 2 games. LSU right now is right back into the mix, not only for the SEC championship, but for a potential college football playoff berth. But those 2 games alone are going to determine how LSU season is going to end up.
Yeah, LSU, Brian Kelly has them right where they want to be, but that Notre Dame game is going to, I'm sorry, that USC game is going to loom over their heads. I don't know why I said Notre Dame, excuse me. I'm thinking
Yeah.
of last year, right? I think of last year. That USC game is going to kind of loom over their head because they are playing 500 football right now.
You also could
And
be thinking of Brian Kelly as the former Notre Dame head coach. That might be what it
I
is.
know he's the former Notre Dame head
Yeah.
coach. I know he is. And this is kind of his signature where USC was the big game and he kind of choked in the big game in the beginning of the season, especially because
Yeah.
he was on the West Coast, I believe, if that game. I think it was in Vegas, if I'm not mistaken.
That game was in Vegas to start the season, yes.
Crazy how I remember where exactly the game was, but I can't recall who it was against.
Yeah.
Yeah. Listen, LSU has a hell of a schedule coming up at Arkansas at A&M. So,
Arkansas is another
uh,
tough game too, yeah.
if they could get through October, then we could start talking playoffs. But until they get through October, I'm gonna temper expectations right now.
And now for Ole Miss, Johnson, it's pretty much you got to win out. They cannot lose another game. They've said it already that they have to win out the rest of the season, and one of those games they have to win out is against Georgia at home. So they want to have any hope of the college football playoff. The SEC title game by far looks like it's done. The college football playoff might still be alive for them, but it's starting to dwindle. They really need to win out the rest of the way if they
I'm
want
gonna
to have a
disagree
chance.
on the SEC title game. I think it's still wide open.
You think it's still wide open even if they
I
lose two
think it's
games?
well,
Or even
no.
though it's a third game?
I mean, overall, it's still wide open.
I mean, yeah. I
I
don't.
really
I
think
think
it's still wide open.
I don't know. I think they're out of it at this point. Texas has
Maybe.
been rolling. Georgia's still
Yeah,
up
but
there. A and
yeah,
M's
I
been
know.
playing better.
Yeah, they have. Yeah, they have. But A&M, all those teams are susceptible for at least one more loss. So if A&M gets 2 losses, congrats, you tie Ole Miss. Alabama gets another loss, congratulations. They're at 2 losses too. Georgia could easily have 2 losses too. So like it's still, I think it's still
That's
wide
yeah.
open.
I guess it's fair. I mean, I think it. I still think they have to win out, in my opinion.
They have to win out. Yeah, I
But
totally agree that they have to win out, but they're not like it's not a
yes,
foregone conclusion that they're
I'll
done
say
with the
that
title.
I say the title hopes for the SEC are very slim.
Slim. I will
It's a
say
very
slim. But
it's a very
the
slim margin.
how about this? The door is closed, but there's a cracked window. So there's an opportunity to
So
get
there's
in. Does that make sense?
yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, I mean it's tough because that Kentucky loss really set them back. As you mentioned, Darb was playing phenomenal to start the year, and ever since the Kentucky game, they've, as you mentioned, they've looked mortal the last couple of weeks, and it's not looking good for them now. They fall in the rankings, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Um, we'll talk about 3 teams, shots before we go into the top 25 breakdown, and we saw Penn State close winning against USC. They were down 14 at one point in that game, had to come all the way back, and they win the game in overtime. We saw Alabama almost collapsing. They were losing for a majority of that game against South Carolina. Took a lead in the fourth quarter. They almost blew it away, though. They gave up a touchdown with under a minute left. Did stop them on the 2-point try to keep them up 2. But then they gave up an onside kick, which gave South Carolina a chance to win the game. South Carolina was not able to get into field goal range. They lost the game by 2. So Bama was able to survive. And then Tennessee as well, trailing at halftime, had to come back. They sent the game in. They gave up a late touchdown, which forced the game into overtime against Florida, but their defense got a big stop in overtime. They were able to get a touchdown, and they were able to avoid the upset as they beat the Gators in overtime. Out of those 3 teams, which is the more concerning team that you are looking at for the next couple of weeks? Is it,
Oh,
you
Penn
know,
State by
is it
far.
Penn State?
Yeah, Penn State by far because Alabama played South Carolina. South Carolina is a lot better than their record shows. They play in a very tough conference. The losses on the season right now to Alabama, Ole Miss, and to LSU. All 3 of those teams
Yeah.
are top 15 college football teams. They absolutely manhandled Kentucky, and they destroyed Akron, but that's not really talking much. But if you want to talk about Penn State got brought to the wire against oh man,
USC is not like the worst loss. It would
it's
have been. It wouldn't have
it
been
would
the
have been
worst
really
loss.
bad.
It would have been. It would have been great. Essentially is how they
No,
started the game. But I think if you look at Penn State's schedule, other than Ohio State, I mean, they don't get me wrong, they could easily lose one of their other games. Like they're going to Wisconsin coming up. They got to play Washington at home. They maybe could lose one of those games, and then Ohio State, obviously in the middle of those two. So there's definitely a chance they could lose, but there's a good chance for them right now to make. They were the team I was mentioning earlier that could maybe sneak into the Big Ten championship game and maybe ruin a potential Oregon and Ohio State, rematch. But I don't know. If I had to pick
and
between the
yeah,
three, it's probably Alabama.
we have to talk about of what who had the most concerning loss.
Actually, no. Well, no. Who is the more concerning team after they barely survived this past weekend?
Oh,
I'm going
it's
to change
by
my
far Penn
stance.
State.
I'm going to change my stance. I was going to say Bama. I think it's Tennessee. I think it's Tennessee.
Really? Because I think Florida's actually a decent team.
It has nothing to do with Florida. It has more of the fact that Tennessee, the last 3 weeks, this dates back to the game against Oklahoma a couple weeks ago. They have not looked good offensively. And yes, maybe it's because of the competition they played the first 2 weeks. Maybe that's why the offense looked that great. But close game with Oklahoma. The defense really had to step up in that game. They looked really bad against Arkansas. They didn't look good in this game either against Florida. And look at the next couple of weeks they got. Big game with Alabama this week. Kentucky, we know, is no slouch. They could easily lose that game. They got to play Georgia at Georgia, and they got to play Vanderbilt on the road. And Vanderbilt has looked pretty good the last couple of weeks as well. If I had to pick between those three teams, it's probably Tennessee because they have now looked dominant the last couple of weeks, and they got a really tough schedule to end the season.
Yeah, I mean, oh no, we'll let bygones be bygones right here. I think you're entitled
Yeah,
to
we're
your
all
opinion,
entitled to our
and
opinion. Yeah,
yeah. So I mean, it's not like I'm gonna sit here and like, oh, like,
I
how
understand what
could
you're
you?
getting at too.
Yeah,
Penn State's definitely because we know because let's face
I'm
facts.
going
We
against a
know
team not in the SEC. Pretty much, that's what I'm
right.
going
We
for.
know we know the history of Penn State the last couple of years, and this is why this new iteration of the college football playoff really works out in Penn State's favor. But
A lot of these teams: Penn State, Notre Dame,
right,
Ohio State, and/or Michigan, one of those two. It works out for a lot of teams.
right,
Alabama and/or Georgia. There's 4 or 5 teams right there.
right. So it works out for these teams, but the history of Penn State that there's a gimme game where you're like, oh, not surprising that they lost this one because this is what's been Penn State's unfortunate hit back history the last couple years. That's why I was scared for them against USC. I mentioned it last week. I said it would not surprise me if they lost that game going into Southern California. It's a game that everyone's expecting USC to lose and Penn State to win. And Penn State for the first quarter was pretty much looking like dead to rights. They looked like they were done in that game. And thankfully their offense picked it up before going into halftime. And then they finally got into that groove going into the half, going into the second half. So they were very grateful to come out of that game with the victory. But I can see where you're coming from as well. That was a very, very concerning way that they played that game, at least to start off that game. And they cannot afford that, especially with them playing Ohio State in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And Big Ten play is getting stronger. They added a great team in Oregon, like we kind of glazed over before at revenue top dog, and you still have Michigan, no slouch. You have Ohio State, which is right there, and you have other teams fighting for supremacy like Penn State. So you have in those, I think
And
you could
there
call them the core four going forward,
and there's some surprising teams
the
we've had this
flagship
year.
programs.
Right, and we've had some surprising teams as well this year in the Big Ten, which we'll kind of, we'll talk about a little bit now with the not the mushy hour, but the breakdown of the top 25 polls. And you know, when we look at the polls this week, Texas remains number one. I think that was the correct move by the committee. I think people were maybe clamoring for Oregon to be number one after they beat Ohio State. But after what Texas did against Oklahoma, and say what you will about Oklahoma, I know they haven't looked great this season, but it's a rivalry game. Those usually come out to be, close games each and every time.
On a neutral
Texas,
site, on a neutral site, quote unquote.
Texas just dominated them from start to finish. It started off slow for Texas in that game going into the second quarter. Texas dominated the rest of the way. Offense looked great. Their defense looks phenomenal right now, and especially when you're you're a former Big 12 team. Everyone's been like, oh, you're a former Big 12 team. Your defense probably sucks. Their defense is one of the best in the nation right now. And now, them being in the SEC, you need a strong defense against some of these top schools like Alabama and Georgia. So, I think that was the right move to keep them at number one. But do give Oregon their flowers. They are the number two team now in the country. They're followed by Penn State now at 3 after their close win. Ohio State does drop down 2 spots, but they still are in the top 4. They dropped down to number 4. Georgia, Miami stay where they're at. Alabama, surprisingly, did not fall in the polls. I think maybe that was where people were kind of a little bit thrown off after their close encounter with South Carolina. We
Yeah,
saw
it's because
LSU.
we had.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's because you had so many other
I think
close
it was just
wins.
right.
That's why.
Right. You had LSU moving to the top 10 after the win over Ole Miss. Iowa State is now into the top 10, which I did not think would happen at the beginning of the season. And Clemson remains at number 10. Following that out, we have Tennessee falling down. We saw movement from Boise State. And how about Indiana? The Hoosiers 6-0 in the Big Ten right now. They're one of the undefeated, surprisingly. They're number 16 in the country. Ole Miss dropped down a bunch of spots after the loss to LSU. SMU moving up in the polls as well. Love to see that from the Mustangs. They're now number 21. And how about this, Johnson? Army and Navy are ranked together for the first time since 1996. Both are still undefeated. And as we know, they have that pivotal game at the end of the season between the two teams. They also have to play Notre Dame at some point this season. And they might even play each other before the Army Navy game in the American Championship game. So we might have that game in back-to-back weeks. So it's been an incredible year so far for those two programs.
Yeah, I think it's looking more and more likely we see that in back to back. It'd be so Notre Dame to lose to both Army and Navy, because and I've said this before, and I don't care how many Notre Dame fans live in New York, it's not going to be a true home game for Notre Dame. It's not. What I'm referencing is they're going to play
Well, I
Army
guess,
and Navy in
yeah.
MetLife Stadium in 2 weeks,
Well,
and
no,
then I think in
they play Navy and MetLife in 2 weeks. Then they play
and then
Army at Yankee
at Yankee
Stadium.
Stadium next month.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So I don't think they're going to be true home games, especially for Army, with how close West Point is to Yankee Stadium. Uh, I think they'll have a great showing. They're going to have a lot of military alumni there that are going to be proud to be there. So I listen. Don't be surprised if it's a mixed crowd.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, with the way those teams have been playing, Army and Navy might show out even more than ever because there's not a better time to do so, especially with a college football playoff berth on the line, one of those automatic berths, for the non-power 5 schools. Those two teams need to show out and prove to the world that they are for real if they want to have a chance in this year's CFP. But with that being said, Johnson, any other final notes on the top 25 before we head into the mushing hour this week?
Yeah, it's funny that Michigan is right below
In,
Army, but right ahead of Navy.
in
If you
between
said
the
that to a
two.
Michigan fan, like a year after Jim Harbaugh had just gone back, and you said, "Oh yes, 5 or 6 years from now, uh, Michigan's going to be ranked is going to be slightly ahead of Navy, but below Army," I think they'd blow a gasket. So the context of this is pretty funny.
Yeah. Yeah, I would tend to agree. It is kind of funny that they're in between the two military schools, but shout out to the military schools for being in the spot in the season, and hopefully they remain undefeated going into the end of the regular season. But we'll have to see what happens in the next couple of weeks. But Johnson, let's go into now the Week 8 mushing hour of this college football season. Both of us went over 500 last week. You went 5-2. I went 5-4. Remind me never again to pick West Virginia. But we also had a bad beat with Pitt. They won by 2 over Cal. The spread was 3, so very bad beat for us in that game. But still, nonetheless, a very solid week for the both of us. And now, another 6-game slate for us this week here in week number 8. And some very pivotal games that we have this week coming up. Some big matchups in the Big Ten. And of course, some huge matchups in the SEC, including a top 5 matchup between two national championship favorites. So, would you like me to get us going to start off this week 8 mushing hour?
If you could be so kind and do that, sir.
I will do that. And how about this game? Not a game, Johnson. I think at the beginning of the season, we would have had penciled on our calendars going into
Never
week
in a
8.
million years.
You would have thought if we were talking about this game, maybe it's for basketball reasons, but it's for football. Bloomington, Indiana is the place to be on Saturday as Nebraska goes into Indiana to take on number 16. The Hoosiers are 6-0. They are a 6.5 point favorite in this game with the over under set at 50.5. Who do you got for this one?
You know, and it pains me to pick them. I'm gonna pick Nebraska plus 6.5. I like Nebraska as a team. I think they're coming back to prominence, and I think they're at least covered. But I think Indiana wins. Also, shout out to I don't know if you know this, but Shane McMahon's son is actually a running back on Indiana.
I did know this, yes.
Yes, you didn't know
It's
that, so he's
Declan McMahon,
undefeated.
right? His
Yes,
name?
sir.
Yeah, that's crazy. I remember the name. I get up here. I got that first try. Yeah, shout out to India. I listen. You gotta give it to them. Being 6-0 at start the season, I would never have expected that from the Hoosiers, and I'm glad to see that they're starting to make some noise in the Big Ten. However, though, I'm gonna agree with you. I'm gonna put our first mush of the week on this one. I'm gonna go with Nebraska plus 6.5. I think it comes down to quarterback play. Dylan Raiola is one of the better quarterbacks in the country. Nebraska kind of looked really weak last week against Rutgers, or the last game against Rutgers. So a little bit of time off for these two teams. They haven't played since the 5th. So we'll see how they do both fare in this game. But I do have Nebraska at least covering. I could see Indiana, though, coming out on top with the victory.
All right, all right. So we have our second game here. We have the number 6 in the nation, Miami. The Hurricanes going on the road to take on Louisville. The Cardinals are at home. Miami is a 4.5 point road favorite, and the over under slated at 61.5. Tell me who you got.
I'm going to go with Miami minus 4.5, and I will go with the over in this game. I think there's going to be a lot of points scored. Cam Ward's going to show out once again, but the Canes are still my ACC champion pick from the beginning of the season, so I got to keep riding with them until the end of the year.
Okay, I do respect that a lot. However, I am going to I'm gonna do another mush. I'm taking Miami minus 4.5. So sorry, Nick.
Okay,
Miami plus
it's
minus
fine.
4.5. I think Louisville isn't really that great of a team. Unless Lamar Jackson's gonna come back and suit up this weekend. Give me the Hurricanes here.
That's okay. Okay. Let's go to our next game, Johnson. And again, another game in the Big Ten that probably did not expect to have penciled in our radar going into this week in the season, but it is a top 25 matchup as number 24 Michigan goes on the road to number 22 Illinois. The Illini are a home underdog as Michigan is a 3 point favorite with the over under set at 43.5. Who do you got on this one?
Michigan's got to figure out. Give me Michigan minus 3 to cover on the road. I know that I'm picking two road favorites right now, which is disastrous in college football. So that's why I'm 19-31. So just please give me some slack here, but give me Michigan minus 3. It's just a gut feeling.
Yeah, I can't get a gauge of what Michigan is because I thought maybe they had started getting things going, and then the game against Washington happens, and I don't know. But again, Illinois is coming off that wild game against Purdue this past weekend. It looked like they were going to win. They let Purdue come back. The game went into overtime, and Illinois won 50-49. So I don't know what to think of Illinois either. I mean, are they going to compete with teams like Penn State and beat Nebraska, or are they going to be a team that almost loses to Purdue, who's more than likely the worst team in the Big Ten, unfortunately, right now in this season?
Hey,
So
go Boilers, go Boilermakers! Come
we're
on,
bad.
boil up.
They're not doing good in football. Listen, it's the truth. It is what it is. I like Purdue. It has been a great year for them. For me, I'm going to go with the under for this game. I think this will be a low scoring game. An early kickoff. 3:30 for these teams, not really that early, but I think these are two of the better defensive teams in the Big Ten. So I do think we'll see a little bit of a offensive struggle, I should say, between the two. So I got the under. If I had to pick a team to win, more than likely Michigan gets the dub.
All right, that brings us into our second game. We have the number 8 in the nation, LSU Tigers. Go Tigers on the road going into
Tigers.
Arkansas to take on the the Razorbacks. Excuse me, that escaped my mind there for
I
a
would,
second.
would love to know what you're about to say.
It was the Razorbacks. I always had it, and guess what? You'll never know. All right, so LSU is a 2.5 point road favorite, and 55.5 is the slated over under. Give me LSU minus 2.5 here. Again, I'm gonna take the road favorite. Again, here's the trend. So either I'm gonna be really cooking, or there's a reason why I'm 14 games below 500.
Okay, I mean that's fair. I'm 4 games under, so not doing a lot better, but yeah, that's tough. You're trying to get your record back. That's very respectable. But unfortunately, Johnson, I also have LSU minus 2.5. I could see this being a trap game. They could potentially lose this game. Arkansas has shown that they can pull off an upset against a top team in the nation. I just think LSU is getting a good amount of starting to get that wave of momentum that they've been wanting the last couple weeks. I think they keep it going with the win over Arkansas on the road, but it certainly will not be easy in this matchup. Now, going into our next game, a huge matchup in the SEC. Normally, Johnson, this would probably be the game of the week, but with another top game in the SEC, this is unfortunately the second big game of the week this week, as number 7 Alabama goes on the road to Rocky Top and takes on number 11 Tennessee. Alabama is on the road, but they are a 3-point favorite in this game. Over under set at 55.5. Who do you got for this one?
Oh man, I am not gonna take the road favorite this time. Give me Tennessee plus 3. I think Alabama wins this game, but Tennessee's at home, and you can give me points, so I'll take it.
I will go with Alabama -3. So not a mush there. I am concerned they are playing a little bit bad as of late, Bama. Especially the last 2 games, but we talked about it earlier. I think out of these two teams, I think Tennessee is just trending a little bit worse than Bama is. So I will have to tie to win this game and keep their SEC title hopes alive in this one. But Johnson, as I mentioned, that normally would be the game of the week in the SEC, especially, and especially in all of college football. But there's an even bigger one happening this week.
Oh man, and this is probably game of the year, potential national championship
Potential,
preview. We
maybe.
have number 5 Georgia. We got the Dogs going on the road into Austin to take on the Texas Longhorns, the number 1 team in the nation. Number 5 on the road versus number 1 at home. Texas is a 3.5 point favorite. 56.5 is the slated over under. Despite all of that nonsense and everyone talking about Georgia and how they've fallen off and how Texas is the new king, give me Georgia plus 3.5 because I think they're going to win outright. And I think they're going to win outright, give me the points.
Wow, you think Georgia's going to win the game?
I think they're going to win the game.
Wow, okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to go with the over in this game. I'm having trouble picking the game. I really want to lean towards Texas, and I really think Texas is going to finish the season undefeated. But this could be the game if there was a game for them to lose. And it's no surprise that it's against, obviously, a top team in the nation like Georgia. But I do expect a lot of points to be scored. You have 2 potential NFL draft quarterbacks in Carson Beck and in Quinn Ewers, who just returned last week. I just mentioned how Texas defenses were playing great this season. Now they got to prove it in this game against Georgia. I think they will struggle in this one. I think the Dogs will put up a lot of points. If I had to pick between the 2 teams, I think Texas does get the dub. But for the sake of me trying to get my record up this season, I will play it safe and go with the over to round out this week's mushing hour.
All right, so you're gonna take the over. That's the safe one in this game,
I think
because
that's the safest pick for the game.
that's the safest pick I think of all these games. To be honest with you.
Yeah. But like I said, it's been a wild year so far. We're in week 8. Still have a little bit left in the season, but we're dwindling down, Johnson, in the final weeks of this college football season, and it's certainly been, as a lot of people would say, cinema so far for the way this season has gone. Any final thoughts before we wrap this one up?
I'm looking forward to yet another great week of college football. There's not really much more you could ask for because this is such a great sport, and we are so blessed to have these teams every single week. And it's far refreshing from the NFL. I know we cover the NFL here too, but this is just there's just something about college football that I just enjoy this way more than the NFL. And I
Yeah.
don't know what it is exactly, but
You feel the same way about college basketball with the NBA. It's the same
yeah,
exact
I
thing.
really do because but here's the thing, like I think it's because the quarterback play is so bad in the NFL, and we've talked about this a lot.
It's gotten
I
better
think
as
that's
of
what
late, at least.
it's gotten better, but like I think that's what it really boils down to, at least for me.
I think it's just, having this many teams and, this many fan bases and what it means to all these schools and stuff. Like, I think that's why everyone loves college football more than the NFL itself. Not that NFL fan bases are, diehard, but it's like, you go to some of these college football games and, you were at Texas A&M last year and you can attest, like, these crowds just take it to another level. And it's just every single week,
It
no
means
matter
different
who
to
they're
all these
playing, it
teams.
just exactly
All these
everyone's go
college towns that 200,000 people live in them, and 199,000 of them are associated with the university either by students, faculty members, staff members, or they run a business that's the students and the staff. That's the lifeblood of their business. Restaurants, bars, bakeries, barber shops, whatever it is in these college towns. So a good season for them really helps their local economy too. That's why it means so much to these people.
right. And it means so much to us here at the All Gas No Break Sports Show. We're happy to be covering for all of you that listen and tune in each and every week as we, like I said, dive down into the final weeks of this college football season. But for this week, that is going to do it for the All Gas No Break Sports Show. Week number 7 of the college football season is in the books, and now we head into week number 8. Huge matchups in the SEC this week as Alabama goes to Tennessee, Georgia goes to Texas, and who knows, maybe we'll have some upsets along the way. Most likely, we'll be seeing a new top 25 poll next week as well. And we get closer, Johnson, as well, to seeing that first college football playoff poll that's coming out in just a few short weeks. So we'll see what that entails as well. This has been Nicholas Pavona, joined alongside by my co-host Andrew Johnson for the All Gas No Break Sports Show. Have a great rest of your week.